Well, hey everybody, good morning and welcome to session 7 of our verse-by-verse study through the book of Amos here in our virtual Life Bible study at City on a Hill. My name is Pastor Derrick. Welcome in. If you are new here, glad that you are here with us. We have got a great study here today. We're going to be looking at Amos chapter 6, the whole chapter. It's only 14 verses. There's a lot here. And honestly, it's a lot of the same kind of thing that we've been talking about over the last few weeks. One thing about Amos that I think is probably difficult for some people is that the overwhelming majority of the prophecy, because it's a prophet, minor prophet, is against the northern kingdom of Israel. And it can be a little repetitive because every chapter is just God talking about the judgment that's coming against Israel. And I don't want us to lose sight of the end goal, but I also don't want us to lose sight of the fact that while it seems repetitive, this is something that is really important, not only to biblical history, but to us as believers in Christ, to understand that sin is really that big of a deal, and that God has a lot to say about it, and it's not to be taken lightly. It's not something that we just, kind of slap on the hand and move forward. This is a really serious issue, and so God has a lot to say to the people of Israel in their sin, in their unrighteousness, and we get more of that today. I was reminded this week of a scene in one of the movies that's a part of my favorite, storyline franchise ever, Star Wars. Those of you who know me know that well. In fact, shout out to Margie and Jody Hutchinson this morning. I am wearing a pair of Death Star socks that came in a Christmas gift that they gave me, so thank you for that. In 2005, the third installment of the so-called prequel trilogy came out, Revenge of the Sith, which is the movie where we see Anakin Skywalker kind of take his fall deep into the dark side and rise as Darth Vader, the epic, probably most well-known, next to maybe Yoda, person in all of Star Wars. And there's a scene where Anakin and Obi-Wan, his mentor at the time, of course they become enemies eventually, fight another Sith Lord named Lord Tyrannus, who is also more commonly known as Count Dooku. And they had fought one another at the end of Attack of the Clones, the second movie, and lost badly. Anakin got his arm cut off. And by the time Revenge of the Sith begins, it's several years after that, Anakin has grown quite strong, quite knowledgeable of the Force, and so Obi-Wan as well. And so they face off against Dooku, and they're about to begin their duel. And Count Dooku looks at both of them and he says, "I've been looking forward to this." And Anakin says, "My powers have doubled since the last time we met, Count." And Count Dooku says one of my favorite lines in all the movie. He says, "Good. Twice the pride, double the fall. Twice the pride, double the fall." You've heard the saying probably that pride comes before the fall or comes before a fall. It is kind of a shorthand of Proverbs 16:18, which says, "Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall." And, Anakin is saying, "My powers have doubled," and Dooku says, "Twice the pride, double the fall." You think you're double what you were, you're going to fall double what you fell before. And so really a great kind of kickoff reminder of where we're going. We're going to be talking about pride today. And God says in Amos 6:8, "I abhor the pride of Jacob, and I hate his strongholds, and I will deliver up the city and all that is in it." God is very opposed to pride. The book of James says that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And so we're going to talk about that. Verses 1 through 3, Amos calls Israel to look at these neighboring city-states in verse 2. There's a couple of them, actually 3 of them that he mentions. Calneh and Hamath were both Syrian city-states that were under the control of Israel. And then Gath was a Philistine city-state. So here's what this means. It means that these 3 cities, Calneh, Hamath, and Gath, were the first 2 were Syrian, likely countries, okay, that were dominated by Israel and now under governmental control of Israel, but allowed to remain Syrian in nature, okay? They are city-states controlled by a feudal representative in Israel that ultimately dictates and determines what happens with them. Gath was the same thing, except for they were a Philistine group of people. They're conquered by Israel. Israel is now in charge. Israel rules over Gath, but Gath is allowed to remain Philistine in nature. And so these three city-states are brought up, and verse 2, Amos asks, are you better than these kingdoms? In other words, what Israel's saying is, these were countries at one time that had their own national identity. They still have maintained some semblance of their national identity, but they do not control or rule themselves anymore. They are now ruled by you. Are you any different than them, that you couldn't also be taken captive by another country and ruled by another kingdom? This is the question that's being asked. Of course, it's a rhetorical question. The answer is that could absolutely happen, and of course, as we know, does happen to them as a result of their sin. But this is why they have continued to put far away the day of disaster. That's what verse 3 says. And in doing so, they've invited this sort of reign of terror upon their lives. We have a portion on complacency as well. Complacency is a major issue that I don't think we talk about enough, honestly, right now as it is. Verses 4 through 7 talks about those who lie on beds of ivory, those who sing idle songs, those who drink wine, who anoint themselves with the finest oils. They're living this larger than life lifestyle, all the goods, all the material goods you can imagine, privileged beyond belief. Meanwhile, there is another class of people who are being taken advantage of. They're being trampled over. Some of them are being trafficked. There's really bad stuff going on. And it kind of highlights the idea that these people are kind of living high off the hog, and they're totally complacent to very apparent sin that is happening in their midst, some of which they are even guilty of firsthand. Some of the way they got their riches came from the sale of human beings and the slavery of human beings. Amos 2, 6 through 8 talks about that. We talked about that several weeks ago now. Complacency is an issue, right? Proverbs 132 says that the complacency of fools destroys them. It's not a good thing. Their foolishness, their complacency towards what was happening to those people in their midst is a large part of why God brings judgment down upon them. God warns them that 1/10 of them will remain after this judgment. That's in chapter 6, verse 9 and 10. This is not to be taken literally. I don't believe that what's happening here, I don't believe that God is saying that literally 10% of them are going to survive. I think this is a way of saying pretty much everybody you know is going to die. Right? Very few of you are going to remain after this. This is going to be a very severe judgment that is going to come on you because of your sin. I also don't think that this is only talking about physical houses. When he talks about crumbling them, bringing them down, wiping them out, I think I think the wordplay is meant to make us think about houses, and because of this incoming invasion, that is likely going to be the case. But I also think it refers to the royal or upper class houses, family houses. The house, is another way of saying the family, that they are going to be taken down. The great house could be in reference to the royal family. The little houses just could be your average family units. But I think it's a sort of a double entendre to make us consider that, there's going to be physical destruction, but also the family units are going to be rendered, to nothingness, basically. They're going to be destroyed. Finally, we close with this portion on the absurdity of sin. There are a couple questions that are asked here that are just absurd questions. Do horses run on rocky crags, right? The answer is obviously no. No one would run horses on rocky crags. The second question actually is a little more difficult to translate. It can be interpreted in a couple of ways, and both of them yield the same final result. One of them, the question is literally translated, does he plow with oxen? That's how you could read it. And the first interpretation, it could mean to be taken as, does one plow with oxen in the same rocky crags that were just mentioned? So sort of borrowing that from that first question and injecting it into the second one. And of course, the answer to that, again, is obviously no. No one is taking oxen and trying to plow rock. It doesn't work that way. That would be foolish. You would break your plow, you'd likely tire out and probably severely injure, if not kill your oxen doing that. The other way you could translate it, though, is the word with oxen is actually one word in Hebrew, and it can be divided into two words to literally mean with oxen the sea, like the ocean or the sea. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but you could translate it, does one plow the sea with oxen? Again, it's a rhetorical question that is obviously answered with a no. No one would take oxen and a plow out into water. You don't plow water, right? It would be a pointless thing to do. So both of these questions are set up with this with this idea that these are such absurd ideas, and yet this is how absurd the injustice that Israel has committed really is. That they have fallen into such mind-numbingly absurdity with what they have done. And they're going to, again, bring judgment upon them. They've replaced righteousness with wormwood. You've probably heard that term before in a couple of different places, one of two places. The popular sort of pop culture place to hear that is, of course, in C.S. Lewis's flagship work, The Screwtape Letters. If you've ever read that, you know that a young demon is writing to his superior uncle demon, and the superior uncle's name is Screwtape, and then Screwtape writes back to his young nephew, Wormwood. We also find this term in Revelation 8:11, which is the name of one of the fallen angels that falls and turns all of the water, the brooks, the streams, bitter. And that is really the meaning of the Hebrew word for wormwood. It's a gall, or the bitterness in taste. It can also be understood as bitterness in concept. And I think that's probably what's happening here, is that they have traded the acts of righteousness with bitterness, not with literal bitterness, but with bitterness as a concept, right? And finally, chapter 6, the final blow comes when God just tells them straight up, I'm gonna raise up a nation against you, and you're going to be oppressed. You're going to be oppressed from the top to the bottom of your territory. From Lebo-Hamath, which is the northern border of the northern kingdom, to the brook of Arabah, which was the southern border. So what he's saying is, like, look, from Canada to Mexico, there's nowhere you can run. That's kind of a way of thinking about it in our own on geographical terms. We have some study questions, as always. Go through those. That's how you get the verse-by-verse component. The discussion this week is over pride. And we could talk about pride every week, and it would be beneficial for us. Everyone struggles with pride in some area of their life to some degree in every season of their life. I don't care who you are. Pride is an ongoing problem that we have to put to death on a daily basis. So talk about this as a group. There's some really, I think, good introspective questions. Got you reading Philippians 2:3 in here, James 4:6, James 4:10. There's some good biblical references there to read, think about, and talk about as a group. Hope you're well. Hope you're doing really well. Next week is going to be a lot of fun as well. We get the 4 visions of Amos from God, and an encounter that he has with the priest of Bethel named Amaziah. And so stay tuned for that next week. We'll do that, but enjoy this one this week. Enjoy talking about pride, and hope you have a great week. And I will not see you Sunday. I will not be there. I'm going to be out of town, but James will be there in the pocket, and so hopefully you're there. I'll be tuning in online like all of you at home, and so look forward to doing that as well. God bless you. We'll see you next time.